All right. Well, it is 11:30 Central Time and 12:30 Eastern Time. So we're about to kick off our new series, Lunchtime Leadership at Lunchtime webinar series. So if for just a couple administrative overheads before we start, if you're sending me texts and chats, I won't be able to read them because I'm in presentation mode. If you've got questions about the process of the series, you can send them to Erica or Adam. But more importantly, as we roll out the talk today, if you have questions for the Q&A, please send them a message in chat because we've got too many people in the meeting room for us to actually be able to address those with you logging on with your video and then audio. So I am, yeah. So we're living in very interesting times right now. As we think about it, we've had a series of crises over the last 100 years, once about every decade, that causes us to stop and reflect and truly come together as communities. This perhaps is one of the largest ones that we've seen in more recent times. The intent for this Leadership at Lunchtime series is to provide a weekly touchstone for leaders that are helping their organizations maneuver through these times to come together to get some potential insight from differing viewpoints and internal and external subject matter experts to the Haslam College. And more importantly, to just think about and reflect about what they can do to make a difference. So let's start this formally. I'm Dr. Mike Grogine. I'm the director of the Executive MBA for Strategic Leadership in the Haslam College of Business. I am quite privileged and excited to be able to kick off this series for you today, particularly since this topic is not just one of professional interest to me, it's one of extreme personal interest to me. As we start, if we go back, about 2 decades to September 11th of 2001, I was the head of leadership policy for the US Army at the Pentagon. And it was our offices that Flight 77 from American Airlines came through. In the matter of a couple seconds, we lost 20% of our coworkers, colleagues, and friends. When 25,000 people left the building, I was one of a handful whose additional responsibilities required me to go to the Army Operations Center, where basically I worked the rest of that night and then spent the next 5 months as the leadership of the Army addressed the 9/11 crisis. And what that means is that today's talk is not just going to be grounded in my scientific inquiry as an organizational psychologist into leadership, but also some personal experience that I've had and where I've seen leaders truly come to the front and take charge and mitigate the negative things that can occur in these times of crisis. So I've got a couple slides. I'll talk through those a little bit. The intent is we keep this at about 30 minutes and split the time between me kind of sharing some things that leaders can do, perhaps more importantly, just the ability to address the questions that you might have. We'll end our time at 30 minutes. If we have more questions than we have time, I'll hang on a little bit longer with my team to go through some more. If we don't get to everyone's questions, because we've got such a substantial amount of people in attendance, we will write up some responses to those and post them with the recording as we make that available to you. You are more than welcome to share the recording of this session with any of the colleagues that you think would benefit from it after the fact. Yeah, so let's start. This is the first of 8 sessions over the next 2 months. The title of today is Calming the Waters. If we think about it, leadership itself has a pretty substantial responsibility in not just providing direction for organizations to move forward, but to create the conditions for our workforces to be able to focus and to contribute in that direction. in a time of crisis, it's even more critical that we create stabilizing conditions to mitigate anxiety, fear, concern about loss of life, concern about loss of livelihood. And we're going to talk just a little bit about some of the things that we can do as leaders to set that foundation, to calm the waters, so that we can then get on with the business of moving our organizations forward in a healthy and economically viable way. So if we think about it, we have got truly extraordinary times right now. And those extraordinary times are built on external conditions. And those external conditions are best described by a term that we actually put together in the Army almost 20 years ago, almost 30 years ago, to talk about the modern battlefield and how the world outside has these conditions that can create chaos and turbulence inside our organizations. And that term is one of VUCA. It's important for us to look at the conditions of the outside environment before we look at leader actions to combat that, because if we understand those conditions, then we can tailor our actions to mitigate the elements that come about in this VUCA world. So if we start with volatility, and volatility is speed, it's velocity, but more importantly, it's a pace of change compared to a speed of our response. And what it means is that our decision-making cycles are going faster and faster and faster. We get less information available to us before we have to actually make a better decision. And so that volatility increases the pace of how we go about our business and what we're doing compared to the speed of our response itself. The second condition in the VUCA environment is one of uncertainty. And that truly is all about how can we actually predict trends and patterns and the way things are going to go. And in times of high uncertainty, what we see are truly disruptive and unpredictable shifts and changes in the outside world. And these are compounded by the speed in which they're occurring, by that volatility. And so those two things work in tandem together to create this real concern about, do we know what's coming? Are we able to respond in a timely way to do it? And can we set the conditions for us to be successful under just these two elements of VUCA? The third is a level of complexity. The modern world, with the interconnectedness of systems and people and communications and networks, means that the capacity for us to understand a simple cause and effect is just really we're not really capable of that in the modern world. And when we think about that complexity, that cause and effect has been replaced by a dynamic interconnection of systems. So we don't know exactly what happens when we change an aspect of one system, what the knock-on effect is going to be. And the fact is that that level of complexity means that it could be 3, 4, 5, orders of effect away from us. And it's hard to actually predict those, going back to uncertainty and volatility. So perhaps the last one is this idea of ambiguity. And this is the one that is absolutely apparent to us right now. It is the amount and volume of information, both accurate, both false, and also some deliberate disinformation that's being put into our environment to actually slow our response. We've seen a couple episodes of that where foreign actors may have actually engaged in disinformation campaigns to slow down our ability to manage the crisis. So this ambiguity means that we have far less black and white. There's less clarity, and we've got many more shades of gray. And we've got to be able to balance what we know with the source and reliability of that knowledge so that we can make those good, clear, and impactful decisions. So if we think about these four things, in the past few years, businesses have described their markets and industries as in VUCA environments. A lot of consultancies and pundits have said, okay, to address volatility, we have to do this, uncertainty, do that. The problem with it is these things are vastly interconnected. So what I want to talk about are 5 things that leaders can absolutely do that will help impact and mitigate the negative elements of that VUCA environment. And remember that if our normal business is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, it is an order of magnitude larger in a time of crisis. So let's think about fear, anxiety, the emotions that people have about the outside world, the coming back to the concerns, potentially fear of loss of life, of people that they know getting seriously ill, of the loss of livelihood, of the economic impact of the actions we have to take to increase our health and the well-being of our workforce and the citizens in the country. And so what we've got to do is we've got to realize our role as leaders is to create really, breaker bars, seawalls that we can't necessarily change the waves coming off the ocean, but what we can do is create the breakwaters that minimize the impact of those waves. And so the 5 things I'm going to talk about here in a second are all about how do we minimize the negative impacts of that volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I think we have to start by providing clarity of vision and intent. We have got to plant the flag in the future that tells us this is where we're going to be. These are the things that we have to pay attention to get to this end state. So let me give a quick example. After 9/11, when all of the American or US flag carriers, the 9 major carriers went immediately into the red because we grounded their fleets for 3 days, Herb Kelleher, as the CEO of Southwest Airlines, came out and told his folks, my vision and intent is that we will get through this together in a much stronger position when we're done. And we'll do it with no one losing their job, with no furloughs, with no reduction in force. That's quite critical. His picture of the future told them a little bit about what they were going to do to get through, but he described an end state that people could then articulate to each other, could share and distribute. And it was clear. There wasn't any ambiguity. We're going to get through it. We're going to be stronger, and we're going to make certain that everyone that's here today will be part of this workforce in the future. That was his vision and intent. You have to decide what yours are going to be during this time, but it needs to not just focus on the crisis in front of us, but what does it look like to come through it at the end? And I use that term come through it quite deliberately because we can't go back and we can't go around. The only thing we can do is lead through this crisis. And we have to be able to describe the end state after we come through it, after we're out the other side. The second thing that we should be thinking about as leaders is simplification. One of the primary principles of transformational leadership is that of simplification. There are 2 elements for us to think about as we simplify. The first is kind of captured in the story about Napoleon as he would put together his battle plans with his generals. He would have a corporal polishing his boots at the same time. And as they came up with all of their orders and how they were going to execute the strategy on the battlefield, at the end of it, he turned to the corporal and he would say, does that make sense to you? And if the corporal said yes, they distributed the orders. If the corporal said no, they went back to work. What Napoleon believed was that if the lowest level member of the organization understands what they're trying to achieve, and it's in a meaningful, clear way, they will be successful. So the first level of simplification is making certain that all of our folks understand what we're doing. The second element of simplification is one of focusing on those key and critical priorities to get through what you're going through right now. If we go back to Herb Kelleher, he had 2 priorities, 2 imperatives that he gave to his folks. And he said, we need to focus on taking care of our workforce. We will make certain that all of our people work together and that we're taking care of each other. And second, we will take care of our customers. So his, strategic imperatives, his focal points were all about his workforce and the customers themselves. You should take a look within your own area of responsibility of what are the things your folks have to focus on? 2, 3, 4 things. There are 1,000 tasks that have to be accomplished, but give them clarity in prioritization as well. Here are the 4 things that we're going to do to get through this crisis successfully. The third thing is to communicate constantly. Now, this sounds quite easy, but the problem with it is exacerbated by the social distance, by the fact that our crisis is one of a virus that's transmitted person to person, and it undermines our typical communication processes. So as we communicate, clearly and constantly, we have to give a view from the top. Folks believe that the leadership has better insight into what's going on, and we have to be sense makers. We've got to be able to kind of go across the boundaries and borders and give information that's relevant and salient to our folks. We have to be cautious about the mode of communication. Right now, most of us are relying quite heavily on email communication because it's a good standoff distance. You can't transmit a virus, a physical virus, through email. At some point, email is a sole mode of communication. People become fatigued from it. They won't pay as much attention to your messages. So you have to look at telephone conversations. You have to look at webinars and video teleconferences like this one. So you're going to have to think about, when I communicate, should I be changing my mode of communication to make certain that people are paying attention to the key and clear messages I have. The fourth is one of projection. Calm, confidence, and community are 3 of the things that people are going to want to see from us. If we go back to the first Gulf War, there was a task force commander by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Kolb. And in training, he was very excitable. He was about 5'4", 5'5", looked like Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. And everyone was wondering how he was going to command in combat. And he had a high-pitched voice, and he spoke very fast. The first enemy fire that task force took, people were worried. They were saying they were drawing fire, and they were looking for guidance. The amazing thing is that his voice lowered, he talked slower, and he said, "What's in front of you? Okay. How do you want to go about this? Okay. Your training will carry you through. We're all together. Go do it." He dropped the pitch of his voice. He projected calm. He told folks he was confident in their abilities, and it mitigated the anxiety they had of being under fire. It's the exact same thing in a crisis today. We have to project that calm, confidence, and the sense of community. And then the final thing is to be a standard bearer. We have got to be leaders of character. During this time, how we react in a crisis will set the conditions for our future culture as the culture of our organizations evolve. Wolfgang Goethe said that character is born in the stormy billows of the world. Leaders of character right now, and folks that make leaders that make values-based decisions, will have far greater and longer impact on their organizations than those that are just reacting to the crisis in front of them, and they're shaving corners to get to the outcomes they're looking for. We have to set that tone, but also, as importantly, we have to talk about how we're all in this together. And so that standard bearer is that you are setting the example for the organization in how to approach the crisis, as well as, if we look at the top elements here, the what that we do in that crisis. So if we think about it, these things are not magic. They're not voodoo. There's no silver bullet. These are the things that I have written on my whiteboard, which is make certain that I'm clear in my intent, keep things simple, make certain I'm talking to the folks constantly. I'm projecting calm and confidence in them and our sense of community, and I'm carrying the flag. I'm the standard bearer for our teams in how we approach these trying and turbulent times. And I know that you've got probably a lot of questions to ask about this that you'd like to kind of kick in. So let me stop with that and say that finally, as we get through this time of trouble, it's leadership that will make all the difference. And how we lead will set the conditions for the recovery of the health and welfare of our folks, as well as the financial elements of our organizations. Okay, so let's go ahead and work with some questions. Adam and Erica, go ahead and send me those questions, or actually come on and ask me those questions and we'll address them.
Hi all, you will notice in the chat function that I've mentioned a couple of times, if you have any questions, please send those directly to me or Adam in a private chat, and we will moderate those with Mike, and hopefully we can get you guys some great answers.
Okay, Adam, what questions do you have that people are sending to you?
Mike, what about changes in resources, and how does a leader deal with possible income loss?
Okay, yeah, so I mean, that's a really good question. The first is changing in resources, because we have to, I've been talking with folks for the past week, and they're moving, many of them are moving to a work from home type condition. They're increasing social distance. They're reducing the size of their shifts. That means that different resources need to be allocated in different priorities than we might have done before the crisis. I think we have to start with clarification of what our principles are. What are those strategic imperatives, that second element of that, of simplification? What is it we have to focus on? And then we need to allocate the priority of resources to that. If you watch the news right now, the state governors are asking for the medical supplies. That's theirs because they are focusing on minimizing the impact on the emergency rooms and the intensive care units. And so for them, having that steady supply chain is quite critical over lots and lots of other resources that they might be asking for at this time. And at the end of the day, the worry about financial loss is going to be on a lot of people's minds. Some is going to happen. But this is no different than the Great Recession when we started looking at 2007, 8, and 9. The issue the oil and gas and energy industry faced with the glutting of the market in 2010, 11, and 12, and the price per barrel dropping so low. This is just, we have to accommodate, and we have to account the fact that we are going to lose some money. But how we spend our resources in the current times will prepare us to do better as we start the recovery process. Erica, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. So I have one more question for you. What do you do until you have a plan put in place?
That's a good one. So I go back to my old Army days in the answer to that question. The first thing you do is make certain you have clarity in your head of kind of where you need to go. You don't need the full plan, just identify the destination. And then give a warning order. Tell your folk, this is where we're going to go. We don't have the full deliberate plan right now. Here are some of the contingencies we should be thinking about. But we need to start getting our people ready to move towards that. We're going to have to look at reallocating our resources. We're going to have to look at tightening our belts quite substantially. We're going to have to look at preparing to shift our business and to come back to certain customers and certain elements of our marketplace for rapid recovery. But you don't have to have the perfect plan, because honestly, you won't have the time to do it. The interesting thing is, let's go back to Southwest in 9/11. Within a day or two of being grounded, they made a call without a business study, without a consultancy agency telling them it was the right call or not, and said, we will give a full refund to any of our customers that was unable to travel during that time period. They didn't say, we'll give you a credit. They said, we'll give you a refund. And that was a brave move, because it could have actually completely taken out the financial resources they had, the depth of cash that they had held back. And what happened was the customers responded quite positively towards it. People even put $20 bills into envelopes and mailed them to them. So this idea that it's going to be painful. We have to give people the truth, but in a way that lets them know that there's also hope and that we have a destination to move through. All right, what other questions?
Mike, if I'm so if I'm putting out fires and dealing with turbulence, how do I balance the setting of vision?
Yeah, that's a good question. I use the analogy of it's hard to rearrange the furniture in a house until you've put the fire out on the roof. Certainly there's an order to those things. I think at the more strategic level, the senior levels in organizations, we have to balance that in equal measure. We have to get our plans together in-house and then trust our more junior leaders to execute that while we're looking towards the future. And so we do both. The deeper you go in an organization, the more tactical you're going to become. So at the ground level of organizations, it's firefighting. It is cleaning up the mess. It is keeping everyone aligned with the immediate outcomes. As you move higher in the organization, then we have to actually balance those in an appropriate measure. So I am going to actually open up the ability for everyone to unmute themselves and ask me questions, because some of you may be a little bit hesitant to send those questions to Erica and Adam. So
Actually, Mike, we have a few more questions that we can
okay.
go through. Okay, great. So my next question is, I think of slow and steady equals steady and fast. Is it a good practice to use these 5 norms as a way to start meetings, thus setting this tone for the meeting and getting to the simple actions we need to execute?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, I think the more we talk about these 5 things leaders can do and we embed them and flow them down the organization, the easier it is for us to manage the fear and anxiety of the external factors that are going on. And once we've been able to at least manage those and create a breakwater for them, then it allows us to focus at the business at hand. So I think that, particularly the lower level leaders who are further and further away from the strategy and the insight into the industry, into the changes, into the impact, the more we can kind of help them do these things, establish their own clarity of vision. Here's what we're doing as an organization. Grow Gene down at the ground level. What is it that you're going to do with your folks? What flag are you planting for them? How have you simplified? Have you given them things to focus on, imperatives that they have to go to pursue to be successful? What communication are you doing? The deeper we go into leadership levels in an organization, the less experience people have. This may be the very first crisis our first and second tiers of leaders have ever experienced. So kicking off those meetings and then communicating these things that people should focus on will help those leaders also calm themselves. So if they feel these are the things that I've got to be doing for my folks, it'll calm down their own concerns and allow them to lead more effectively. Good.
Mike, I got a question. So we've talked a lot about what we need to do, but let's talk about maybe what we might not need to do. And so beyond the obvious, what are the biggest mistakes people make?
I think the first and foremost for leaders, the biggest mistake is to wear your emotions on your sleeve. You've got to be careful that, and I'm not talking about lying, or impression management. I'm just talking about you don't have the luxury in a time of crisis to have the panic mode yourself. And I think very often in the past, what I've seen is if you're caught flat-footed, if you weren't prepared for something, you got to catch your breath and then realize that folks are looking to you to set the tone for how they should react to the crisis in the environment. So first and foremost, get yourself under control. Other mistakes are to move too fast to doing things that you can't take back. And I'm talking about in crisis, we tend to overcompensate our activities to make the bad stuff go away. I've never met a leader that has moved quickly to do a reduction in force. Every leader I've ever engaged with have had to furlough or lay off people has very often done that with great sense of sorrow and anxiety. But there are ways that we can do this that will let folks know if we have to reduce their workload or furlough them, that our intent is to come out of this in a strong position and to bring them back at some point. But that takes me to the third thing we should not do. Do not make promises you cannot keep. Be very cautious about saying that there are things that you're going to do that are not within your power to actually deliver. So be very careful about the promises that you make. So those are kind of three of the things, the mistakes that I think that can happen during this time period.
Mike,
One second, Erica. We are at 30 minutes. If you need to check out right now, please feel free to do so. I'm going to hang on with Erica and the team and anybody else that wants to stay with us and answer some more questions. And we'll let this go, a little bit longer to make certain that we can kind of be able to engage you with the things that you have interest in. So, and if you're checking out right now, you can come back and you'll see the recording of those other questions being asked as well. Thank you so much for your time. Okay, Erica, we're now in overtime.
awesome. Okay, so I have two questions that I'm going to ask you that I think actually coincide with each other. So the first question is, if leadership above you isn't providing a clear or timely message, how should one handle this? The second question, for second and third level leaders, managers and below, how should they be directed to stay calm and confident and lead their teams in the absence of information from top level leaders?
Yeah, that never happens, right? No, it's the leaders above us are going through the same things that we are. And if we're not getting what we need from them, it doesn't mean that we don't have the responsibility to give our folks under us, our area of responsibility, what they need from us. So we have to make some guesses at that point. If we're not seeing high level clarity of vision and intent, we have to actually guess what that would be for the organization 1, 2, 3 levels above us. And then we have to plant our flag for our folks that get us moving in that direction. If there's zero communication from above, if there is zero strategic planning from above, then we're going to have to be the strategist, and also we're going to have to influence up. So the two parts to that first element of your question was, one, we've still got to provide that for our folks, and we're going to have to make our best guess in the absence of information. The second is that it's also very important that we lead up, that we have conversations with folks higher than us in the organization to say, look, I really need some clarity on where we're going to go. Give me some ideas, at least on the things that we're going to be focusing on. And through that upwards influence, we can start the nested nature of the vision and intent. Ask the second part of your question because my brain went blank. Erica?
I'm here. So the second part of the question, for second and third level leaders, managers and below, how should they be directed to stay calm and confident and lead their teams in the absence of information from top level leaders?
Yeah, I think coming back to some of it's going to be wait and see. Some of it is going to be saying, look, we are in this together. We will survive as a team. We will thrive as a team. And it's to tie into the strengths that you had before the crisis. What is it that we did best together? We problem solved. We took care of our customers. Okay, well, we're going to problem solve. We're going to take care of ourselves. And then once we do that, we're going to take care of our customers. It is becoming that strong beacon for folks to gravitate to, again, to suppress the negative emotions and the anxiety and fears that are created by this environment. Even in the absence of a perfect direction, and we'll never have that, but even in the absence of even any direction, we can provide it within our folks. And deeper in the organization, you're closer to the folks that are going to be feeling the most concern. And so that calming influence, that demonstrating confidence in them to take care of what they need to do, and then building the idea of we're a community together and using narrative and storytelling, and then constantly communicating with them, I think is even more critical at the lower levels.
Mike, what new strategies are needed in the stay-at-home work environment? And many leaders rely on face-to-face encounters for influence. How does that adapt for a stay-at-home format?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I'm not going to do a deep dive into it because we actually have a session coming up in a few weeks on leading a distributed workforce, which is kind of some of the tactics, techniques, and procedures about how we would go through that. So let's think about what we need to do right now. We need to basically make certain that we've got direction for folks. In times of distributed workforce, when we're no longer using the traditional channels, we have to communicate more. We have to reach out more often. We have to create space for people to come together. Loneliness and isolation is the predominant feeling that's going on right now. I spent the last week talking with contacts in dozens of companies, and those two things, loneliness and isolation, for those that went to a work from home workforce, were the loudest and most impactful elements of that. And so what we've got to do is combat that. We need to make certain people know that just because you're working from home, you're still part of us. We're still together. That it is lonely, but you're not alone. And the things that they have to do on a daily basis, we're trying to substitute electronic versions of that, which is a pale substitute. And we've got to make certain that we as leaders establish those clear expectations of what good looks like with them, and then tell them how we're going to collectively work through it. So again, not going to do a deep dive into that question because we have a whole session set up for that, but that is a great question. Erica?
Okay, my next question is, how does this event compare to previous in that we have massive demand destruction in addition, an oil oversupply and a price war?
Ask me that one more time.
How does this event compare to previous in that we have massive demand destruction in addition to an oil oversupply and a price war?
Yeah, okay. There are elements of this that we can find in the housing bubble burst that then led to some economic meltdown and then the Great Recession in the United States. Basically, a flattening of the markets. The follow-on from that Great Recession also was very similar to what we have right now, which is that the glut of the market and the price per barrel being so low. What I think is differentiated right now is there were capacities for people or for countries at that particular time to draw upon resources that they'd stockpiled. And they were less disrupted by the economic changes as well as the price per barrel and the, if you will, the oil war. Right now, the virus is indiscriminate. Whole countries are locking down. So the space is one of more distributed pain that we're seeing it across much more of the world. And what it means then is some of those things are going to go away and some of them will be put on hold until after the health crisis has abated. And then we're going to go back to the way we've done business then. We should be preparing today for that economic impact in the next 4 to 5 to 6 months. And that's the thinking and looking ahead. I think that's quite important for us. Okay, any other questions?
One more on my side, Mike. But what about ethics? There are many temptations for workarounds that may be questionable.
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. That last point that I talked about being a standard bearer is so critical right now. When we think about how leaders impact and reinforce culture, how we respond in a crisis is the second biggest thing that tells our folks what's important to us. We could, now let's be very clear. A challenge to a practice, policy, or procedure or a rule does not necessarily mean an unethical act. It means that we're violating a process that we have set up. The ethics are the shared values that we have, the things that are important to us, that are meaningful to us, to take care of each other, take care of our customers, to be truthful and honest in design, to work together collectively as a team, to be safe. And that's the one that actually might be an ethical issue here, is that we might allow slippages in our safety procedures, which would be a violation of a core value for many of us in the pursuit of accelerated manufacturing, production, transmission, transportation. So I think as we act as leaders right now, we have to be attuned to the character that we're projecting, the type of character that we're manifesting and leading by example for our folks, because that will set the tone for the next few years, how we act in the current crisis. Erica, do you have any more?
I actually have a couple of more if we have time for a couple more questions.
Sure. I think we'll probably cut off in the next 10 minutes or so.
All right, great. So my next question, a number of my staff are working parents. A number of them are feeling the pressure of working remotely from home and helping to guide their children through distance learning. How do you help accommodate this new reality to lessen the pressure on workers and ensure our professional objectives are still met?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's probably 2 to 3 parts to it. I think the first is we have to lead with empathy. Yes, they have responsibility to our organization, but they also have responsibility to their families. And the best of the leaders amongst us understand that problems at home will soon become problems at work. And so the ability to give them that work-life balance is going to be quite crucial. We have an entire session talking about that kind of work-life balance, when in honesty, you used to go home to get away from work. And now if you're going to telecommuting, if you've gone to a distributed workforce, your home is your workplace. And so we've got to find ways to help folks delineate between those. And we'll talk about that in 2 weeks. As leaders, we have to manage expectations of performance, but part of it as well is there's enough slippage between our teams themselves that some of us can pick up some of the slack when we don't have those responsibilities on us. And I'm not talking about, forever. I'm talking about just if someone has to do something, that someone else steps in for them. Having the family stay at home, particularly during lockdown crisis, is going to create far greater elements of stress and strife. We've got to find creative ways to get our work done as organizations while accommodating our, the workers who have families and lives outside of that organization. I know that's a terribly waffly answer, but let's just come back to leaders have to be empathetic at this particular time. And we've got to be flexible and adaptable and take care of each other. And when one is not able to contribute at a high level, someone else steps in and carries them for that. It's not going to be forever. And it will also build the cohesive bonds amongst our workforce far greater. And you said you had one more?
I do. Okay, so advice for managing strategy while competing national media news when it comes to best, safe, and practical practices for business practices is not consistent with local advice and direction, i.e. not everyone is being told to stay home, just non-essential employees.
Yeah. I think we each get to make our own decisions that can increase the stringency to become more strict than what local law and policy is. So if, one of the interesting things is there was a lot of claims in the state of Texas that the governor had not put in a state lockdown. This is a massive state. And it has vastly different areas. Houston is completely different than Plano. And what he was trying to do, that looks like to me, was to delegate to local leaders how best to handle the area of which they were responsible. If we have got local guidance that is saying one thing, and we believe that being more stringent and stricter is healthier for our folks, we make that choice. We tell our folks, look, we expect you to do this, and it's for you, it's for your health. When I come back to one of the issues of ambiguity, which is that there is a lot of competing information out there. I mean, people are drinking aquarium cleaner because they think it's the same thing that's in a malaria treatment. We've got to calm that down. We've got to tell people to look at the sources of information, to look at the reliability of those sources. We have to listen to medical professionals when we're talking about combating the virus. We have to look for business professionals when we talk about how do we survive economically through these times. We've got to be able to source our information and reduce some of the noise that folks are being bombarded with. But yeah, I come back to, it is my responsibility as a leader to make certain that my folks are as safe as they possibly can be. And if that means I'm more strict in my application of certain practices than the outside world, so be it. Because at the end of the day, I have to look at myself in the mirror and say, did I take care of my folks? Did I create the conditions for them to be healthy and safe?
Mike, I've got one more if we've got a few more seconds.
Sure.
I think it kind of parlays into what you were just saying. Reduction in force seems imminent. When and how do you communicate that to your troops?
Yeah. There's no science to that. There's an art to it. If you are reducing your head count because you're trying to reduce labor costs, first and foremost, think about how you're going to go about that. Are you going to furlough people? Are you going to put them on, no pay, but with the commitment that they'll be the first back on the payroll when finances improve? Are you going to do early retirements? So there's a whole series of reduction in force measures that's, beyond just I'm going to fire a bunch of people and save the money that I was paying them. The second is one of notification. And I think you have to be quite cautious. If you notify too early that we're doing this, you can create panic. But what what you have to communicate is truth as well. So we will have to tighten our belts. Here are the areas in which we're going to, in the order we're going to do that. First and foremost, we're going to stop hiring external consultants, or we're going to dial back on our business operations here and here and here as a cost reduction. And then it's a staged, time-phased approach. Your folks should know that they're important to the organization. They should know that it's their performance that will actually improve the financial position of the company in the future. Let me give one example on this. When we started looking at the airline industries, and then we started looking at oil and gas companies that were squeezed out because the price per barrel went below the break-even point, what we actually found is those that came back better and faster were the ones who spent their time focusing on their people. So the first thing they did was not cut payroll to save the immediate cash drain. The first thing they did was think about how do we keep our people employed and how do we keep them as part of our community. And there's a very strong correlation. We don't have causal data, but the correlation is that those companies that spent that time paying attention to their workforce came out of the tribulations faster and better. And so if you have to move into a reduction in force, be honest. Let them know that they're important and that they're not being let go because of anything that they've done, but that when times get better, that they're still important to you. Make certain that you maintain contact with folks if they're on furlough or if they've been reduced, and make certain that you can have the community of folks in and around help them through those areas. There's far more art than science to that, and you're just going to have to let them know at the right point to give them enough warning. Don't do it on a Friday with them not coming to work on a Monday. Give them some time to prepare. Help them get the resources together for it. All right, and I realize that sounds, a little bit of holding hands and singing Kumbaya, but in general, I think that that's a fairly decent approach to a very painful activity. I want to thank everybody for showing up today. We still have, almost 2/3 or 1/3 of the people here that were here when we started. This is going to be recorded, and as soon as we're done and we get the recording back, we'll upload it to the web, and you can use that URL that you had to come back and revisit this. We hope to see you next week. We want to create this space for us to keep coming together as leaders and to connect. And if the format was clunky with submitting the questions and stuff like that, send us a note. Let us know how we can better serve you. We did it because we had, upwards of 100 people on the line, and 100 voices all at once is just very, very hard to work. So, okay. Thank you so much. Be safe, be healthy, take care of your folks, and realize that we're not through this yet. We've still got some time. And so leadership is far more important right now than perhaps any time in the past 20 years. So be good, strong leaders of character. Thank you all so very much.